Hello, everyone. Let's talk about Russia and Ukraine again. When I say Russia, I mean the Russian government, those working for the government, supported in action or in words, whether they live in Russia or even in the West or abroad. So when I say Russia, I mean those who actually perpetrate the war and genocide against Ukraine. But what about ordinary Russians? Do we know what they're thinking? No, we can try. We can try to interview them, and we all are probably familiar with interviews of them. We know what some people are saying in their Russian media. If you know some Russians that speak out, either for or against the war, you know what they're saying. People who make surveys or statistics, they have their tools of how to try to get a public opinion, but it's always complicated because you're dealing here with a dictatorship. Can speak a little bit from personal experience, even though that's the lowest form of knowledge, you could say. But I can say when you grew up in a dictatorship, as I did in East Germany, communist East Germany, you know that someone is always listening. You know that when you say the wrong thing, you or people close to you will be punished for it, or can be punished for it. They may not be punished for it, but the possibility always exists. So if you grow up in a country where you know that speaking out freely will either lead to some surprising or unsurprising career setbacks, either now or in the future, to warnings, people showing up at your door asking you, why did you say that? Or maybe even to imprisonment or death. And we all know that this is happening in Russia. This has happened before the war. We know that Alexander Nemtsov was killed in view of the Kremlin. Litvinenko, poisoned. Former Ukrainian president Yushchenko, poisoned. Prigozhin's plane recently was destroyed. Navalny is sitting in prison because he dared and dares to still speak out against Russian corruption. We know that Zelensky has been threatened by Russia. Now, Zelensky is not Russian, but Zelensky grew up speaking Russian. His fantastic comedy show, Servant of the People, was very popular in Russia because he spoke about corruption. Oh, Putin hates Zelensky because Zelensky spoke the truth. And part of what is happening against Ukraine now has to do with Ukrainians speaking the truth about how the former Soviet and Russian system, how the current Russian system work. We all know that Ukraine has been trying to become democratic, and there have been setbacks. We have the probably fraudulent election of Yanukovych that led to the Maidan Revolution, which is the third Ukrainian revolution already. So no, this was not Western directed. This comes from Ukraine. Ukrainians are being fought because they've been speaking the truth about the Russian system. So we know that if you stand up against Putin, his mafia state, the new Soviet system, Soviet Russian imperial, whatever you call this, whatever Putin has created, we know that you better not speak out. Memorial, the organization that spoke about Soviet crimes, has been shut down in Russia. TV Dodge, TV Rain, and other free television stations had to leave the country. Stalin is being rehabilitated. the whatever, FSB or KGB, is very busy. So every Russian in the country knows this. They know. So if you ask ordinary Russians, if you ask them what they think about Putin's war, they will know the following things. You're asking them means they know how to reach them. Whoever's asking them may also know where they live. If they know how to reach them and how to live, they may know how to reach their family and friends too. So this isn't just about being brave on a personal level. This is about being brave while endangering your family and friends. This is a completely different situation. So if someone comes to you and says, I'm going to threaten you and whatever, and you can say, oh, I'm brave, you threaten me, and I don't care where I live. If someone comes to you and says, well, you know, don't you have a family? Isn't your mother somewhere living there still? Doesn't she need help? What about your children? Or your good friend here, you know, he's trying to get this job. And, you know, it would be a shame if something happened to them. It's a completely different level of threat. So you may be feeling like, oh, you know, I can stand up against this, I can speak out. But endangering your family and friends, that's a completely different thing. So the answer you'll get from anyone in a dictatorship, if they have a modicum of intelligence, will be zip. Or they will pretend to agree. They'll say, well, it's not, you know, Putin, yeah, he's a great leader. He knows what he's doing. Oh, yeah, I'm assuming everything is okay. Well, you know, I'm not political. I don't know about these things. You know, I'm too stupid to understand. The experts know. You know, I trust the government to know what they're doing. You'll hear these kinds of things. Some people may even suddenly emerge and say, yeah, the Ukrainians, they've always been a problem. And yeah, these are really our Russian, and we need to do something. So you'll hear people maybe say that too. Now, in the West, people who haven't grown up in a dictatorship, I'm jealous of you. I'm jealous of you because you don't know that level of fear. If you're a minority in the West, you know some of it. But if you haven't grown up under that system, I'm jealous of you. And you're so privileged. You're a minority in the world. You're a minority that is allowed to say things, to think things, without fearing too much of a consequence. There's this narrative other that, you know, in the West, we can't really say what we want to say, but, you know, we can't say what we think about, I don't know, whatever political topic. Cancel culture. Yeah, cancel culture is bad, but it's nothing like that. So if you want to get a feeling for how this feels like, there's always this movie, The Lives of Others, Das Leben der Anderen, that gives you a great idea how this might feel like. And even then, it's only a tiny idea of how it feels like. So if you see ordinary Russians being asked about what they feel about the war, don't believe it. Now, I don't know what they're thinking. They may all be pro-Putin, for all I know. I don't know. I don't want to believe that. It doesn't help me to believe that. What we believe, what we support, is very contingent on how we live. We all may think, you know, we have opinions and we live, and these are two different things, but no, they're always very connected to it. So the space within which you can mentally move and think is very much contingent or determined by how you live. So if you grow up in a system that really doesn't give you much freedom, you don't allow yourself that freedom. You may be very perceptive in what is going on. But as soon as you have more responsibility than just about yourself, you'll be careful. So how do we know that there might be more Russians that disagree with the war than we think? Let me pose this as a hypothesis here. I think most Russians are against this war. How can I say that? Well, because how the regime acts, how it reacts to its own people. The very fact that everybody who speaks out against the war, and even if they just hold up a white piece of paper, that they're being punished, that tells me that the regime assumes that there is much more disagreement with the war than people think. The KGB or FSB or whatever you call that beast wouldn't do all these things if they didn't feel they were necessary. Elections wouldn't be falsified if Putin didn't feel that was necessary. They wouldn't have basically closed the borders if they didn't feel they needed to keep Russians at home. They're continuing their mobilization. Yeah, there's still people being sent to war. So the way the regime behaves tells you that they operate on the assumption that most people, or a sizable portion of the people, don't like this war, and they have to be made compliant, complicit, and silent through fear, intimidation, punishment, or physical elimination. If that all wouldn't be happening, then you could have an argument, maybe the Russians are unfavorable, but I don't believe it. I believe that there are decent people in Russia that are scared out of their minds. Ukraine and Russia used to be like this. The Ukrainians are their own people, Russians are their own people, but they are very close historically. People have family on both sides. And we know that these are strained discussions happening right now, because Russians don't even dare to speak to their family in Ukraine with honesty. When you go to some YouTube channels of people who have left Russia, even then, people aren't speaking out if they still have family in the country, because they know the regime can get them. If you're asking yourself, why aren't Russians speaking out if they are no longer in Russia? It's because it's just them that have made it. They will have family and friends back then, and they're protecting those people. We are living in a global world where dictatorships no longer just terrorize people inside their borders. It's global. Russian propaganda is global. Chinese propaganda is global. The reach of those regimes is global. So you're no longer safe anywhere. So what are Russians thinking about the war? Well, they know how they are being treated by their regime. They know how their alleged brothers and sisters in Ukraine are being treated in this war. So they would have to be very, very stupid, very, very limited in their thinking if they wouldn't see all of that. And I refuse to believe that. So we are not fighting for Ukraine against Russia. We are fighting for Ukraine and for Russia against this regime. This is not against Russians. This is not against Russia or Russian culture. This is not Russophobic to say we support Ukraine. There's only one prime Russophobic person in the world, and that's Vladimir Putin. The Russian regime is Russophobic. They hate their people. They suppress their people. That's what this is about. What are Russians thinking? Probably what every human being is thinking. I want to be safe. I want to protect my people. And if I have no choice, if I don't know how to protect myself, if I can't fight back, I'll try to sit this out. Now it will be important to see what happens after the war, once Putin is defeated, once this government falls. And it's very likely that this will happen, soon or not soon. Ukraine is not losing. Ukraine will lose a lot of people still. There will be a lot of suffering. But what happens after the war, when there will be Russians who can speak out freely, that will tell you the tale. And here is why I have faith in Russia too. Because there was this time of perestroika and glasnost. I remember Mikhail Gorbachev. I remember all those people from the Soviet sphere who stood up for freedom, for democracy, for truth, from all formerly Soviet countries. We have to make sure this will happen again. We have to make sure people in Russia, in Ukraine, in Belarus, because that's the other victim that no one's talking about, and in other countries, will finally feel again that they can speak up. So don't be judgmental. Don't lose hope. Trust that human beings, when they're scared, may not be saying or behaving in a way what you would like them to say or how you would like them to behave. They're living in an emergency. They're not being able to think clearly or say things clearly. Should they rise up? They might. Russia has had revolutions before, but it has to be at the right moment. And don't underestimate how suppressive dictatorships are now with 21st century technology. We are no longer talking about the kinds of repression that the Soviets had. That was child's play. We are talking about the use of AI in monitoring people's movement. We're looking at entire communication channels being monitored in a way that was never possible before. This is a whole different ballgame. People who may have been able to speak up clandestinely in Soviet times, some of that isn't possible anymore. So be kind. Not to Putin, not to be the regime, not to the regime, but assume it's still the best of Russians. I still have hope. Let's have hope, and let's hope that when this is all over, we'll again see that Russian people are just people like people everywhere else. They have a lot of decency. They have a great culture. They have a future. They have to, next time, when they have the chance, make sure that this doesn't get wasted again, this chance to be free. Thank you, everybody. This is Erratic Attempts. I'm Dr. Philip Kneis. Thanks for listening, and see you later. Bye-bye.